Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Markus Starke, who is an expert in cybersecurity. And in particular, he has been working recently on cybersecurity for the AI applications that corporations are using. Markus, welcome to the show.
Hi, Will. Thanks a lot for having me here. And great to talk to you here.
Great. So why don't you just dive in, walk us through a case example. Before we started recording, you explained to me that, some of the AI tools that companies are now adopting, ChatGPT and some of the other Gen AI tools, as well as tools that are not just Gen AI, but other types, are subject to cybersecurity attack, and you're helping companies defend against that. So walk us through a case example.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So generally speaking, of course, AI plays a broad role for our work. I mean, for every consultant, that's an important topic, but specifically, what we have come across is really thinking about how does AI, and in a broader sense, AI that is used in what I used to call intelligent process automation, how can that also be affected by cybersecurity issues, and how can it be protected? So what specifically comes up, and just to explain this concept of intelligent process automation, is AI, let's say, more and more getting into regular process management and process automation. So you can imagine you have a set of technologies that work together. So things like robotic process automation, which is not a new thing anymore, process mining solutions, maybe chatbots, optical character recognition, but also more and more some degrees of AI, let's say this somehow simpler version or more, let's say, understandable version of machine learning, but also generative AI getting into these applications and building, let's say, an end-to-end process or supporting end-to-end processes. And we have come into the situation that customers address us with the question, is our set of intelligent process automation or process automation, whatever you want to call it, so our set of tools, how we use those in combination, is this still safe, especially also as more and more tools come into play that you don't, let's say, at least feel like you don't totally control them yourself. So, and that's maybe a key question that comes up around, especially generative AI, how much control do we have about that, especially as also more and more users use them individually, and it's not always really controlled by like a corporate framework. And that can create some substantial issues here. So concretely, we had been asked by clients to review their setup for these automation situations, including AI applications, mostly from a what I call target operating model perspective, not so much from a very deep technical perspective. We have created a framework to help us with that, that basically helps guiding through that process, and I would like to share some of the, let's say, perspectives that we've been using for that framework. They are definitely applicable also for other situations, but I consider them especially also, let's say, helpful for these really AI involving or these AI related automation situations. So we say, if you want to evaluate that, you have to look on the one hand on the question, how do you actually govern things, right? How do you govern your whole set of solutions that work together and from end to end? So as said, that can be workflow management, robotics, and generative AI solutions, process analytics, etc. So how do you govern that in terms of roles and responsibilities, access, user rights, etc.? Then how do you ensure that you have an actual, let's say, secure development process for things? So how can you make sure that any solution within that, and for example, the specific AI solution is developed in a secure way? That can mean things like, again, how do you control access rights? How do you make sure it only accesses the data that it should access, that its maybe data is stored in the right places, etc. that encryption takes place, etc. Then the third dimension, so after governance and the actual solution development, would be securing your actual platform. So typically there's like a set of different technologies that somehow have a platform somewhere. So it's not the actual only the actual AI use case, for example, but for example, the Azure-based platform that you're using. So that typically comes into place, let's say, more or less standardized frameworks for example, for securing cloud-based solutions. A fourth dimension that we consider very relevant is to actually create awareness. So for AI, as for every other, let's say, solution, humans are actually one of the largest risk factors in cybersecurity. So and that means you have to address, if you want to get a good, let's say, good degree of cybersecurity, you have to address not only the technical factors, but you also have to address the human factor, and that includes really making people aware what they are doing and where the risks may be, and how to, let's say, reduce that level of risk. And last but not least, the last dimension that we look at is what we call the monitoring and reporting. So even if you are set up properly, if you have a proper set of rules, technologies, etc., awareness, you still want to make sure you control the environment to a degree. So that is relatively broadly applicable to many situations, but specifically this has proven to be very helpful for also solutions that, as said, involve AI as a part of an overall, let's say, automation initiative. Any questions so far, Will, on that?
Yeah, I'd maybe give us a practical, potentially real life example of a cybersecurity threat with a AI tool. So what would an example be?
So a very obvious one is let's say a human user wanting to use, and that's a very simple example, wanting to use some sort of generative AI. So let's say ChatGPT for working on company data, right? So what some people may do is simply extracting data from the corporate, let's say, data pool and sending out an email with this data and sending it to their own private email account, and then doing something with it, right? And putting it into a public ChatGPT instance, which is maybe not what you really want them to do. So this is the very, let's say, very most obvious example, I think, that can be controlled. So there it's actually a lot about awareness, of course, creating awareness that this is not a desired behavior, but also to, let's say, to set up kind of standardized IT security control mechanisms to, let's say, limit the ways data can be extracted from the corporate networks, and to also detect these cases to make users aware that that's not a desired behavior. So that's a very, let's say, I would say a very simple example.
And
But also,
and just educate me a little bit. So let's say that I use my proprietary corporate data and I upload it to the Chat GPT, what they used to call advanced data analytics, to do some analytics on it. So that data is now kind of been exposed to Chat GPT. Is there a way that some bad actor is going to be able to then extract it from that system? Or, like what's the risk? I'm naive about this. So what's the risk? What could happen?
So in that specific case, I would mostly worry about two things. So the one thing is that typically your private, let's say your private computer, laptop, whatever, isn't as much secured as your corporate access, right? So, and as soon as you have sent, let's say, an email with whatever data, let's say employee data or contracts or something, out of your corporate environment to your private laptop, it's at least for some time typically stored on your private laptop, and your private laptop can simply be, let's say, more prone to be, let's say, attacked or to lose some data to an actor than your corporate laptop. So that is I think the one of the risks. The other question, and I think that's not so much a question of let's say an actual attacker. And I'm honestly right now not sure what's the ChatGPT policy, for example, but very generally speaking, corporations certainly want to limit what kind of data is, let's say, made somehow publicly available. And generally speaking, it's not always clear what happens with the data that is put into specific generative AI applications. So
Okay.
that is always a question whenever let's say a Gen AI application is being used. Let's say what happens with the data? How do we, let's say, how can we make sure it's not being used for something that we don't intend it to be used? And especially with very intellectual property, so with any, let's say, important knowledge that is proprietary to a specific corporation, you certainly want to avoid that happens.
My understanding is that if you just use the consumer version of ChatGPT, then if you put anything that you type in there or any data you upload is somehow getting put into its overall training data. So somehow, theoretically, someone might be able to extract it or expose it. But there's also, if I understand correctly, there's now like more of a enterprise chat
Exactly.
GPT solution that companies can get where within your corporate firewall, you could use chat GPT enterprise version and it would be safe because it's not leaving your four walls. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly. So there are options for, let's say, setting up AI applications in a, let's say, in a limited, in a way that they are limited to your own corporate use cases. Still, then there are sometimes discussions. I had that with one client that was, is currently setting up a Microsoft application. Is that data really staying with us, or is it somehow anonymized and then making, let's say, made available, or at least to some degree being used for optimizing the system? So it's not always totally clear, and that's certainly something to investigate. But yes, there are, let's say, corporate versions and corporate instances of these kind of tools that make it certainly make it more secure. But that has to be evaluated in a case by case basis, right? Does that specific solution that you're talking about, does that fulfill your specific needs? And that's very much a, let's say, a question of governance, right? That's a question of what do you want to achieve? What rights do you want people to have? What possibilities do you want people to have? And especially with Gen AI, it's certainly a question of not limiting too much, but on the other hand, really keeping a good degree of control.
What about tools like Zoom? It seems like, and I don't have a firm handle on this, some stuff that I've just casually read online suggests that Zoom is now somehow retaining data on the calls or like transcribing them without letting us know and
Yeah.
storing that information. Am I off base there? Am I falsely accusing Zoom of this? Or I seem to recall that like they own the data.
I would give you the same kind of more or less vague answer. So yes, generally speaking, there's always a risk of that. I mean, all these tools like collaboration tools, they try to incorporate some degree of AI that's maybe transferring calls or maybe automatically at some point, maybe not today, but maybe in the near future, are able to create automated notes out of your calls or like a summary or something. Of course, that is a question. Do you want that? If you want that, do you have an instance of that tool that limits the accessibility of that information to your own organization? So for Zoom, and I'm not sure on these specific solutions, but generally that's just always a question that you need to ask. And one of the key reasons why typically when you introduce some sort of solution, it always makes sense to have an alignment with cybersecurity and to just check with them, is that very generally speaking compliant with what we need from a protection standpoint? And that's a sort of a case by case evaluation, I would say. I mean, there are probably solutions like the standard Microsoft toolkit that you just have to accept, that you have to trust on, that there's a sort of okay policy of how it's handled. But generally speaking, it always makes sense to question those things. And why, if you're introducing a solution, that the way I know it also from other perspectives, if you're doing an RFP, for example, basically every bigger corporation has a step having a sort of cybersecurity assessment for the solution that you want to implement before you do it, and even before you contract it. And that applies again for AI solutions, but also for every other kind of solution that is somehow handling your corporate data.
Any other tips for independent consultants of raising our awareness about cybersecurity and AI?
I would say, generally speaking, some basic rules apply to the use of AI. And I think what's most important is really to make sure what data do you put in there, to make sure you have you have a controlled instance of the AI tool that you are using. If you do not, so if you're using, let's say, the public ChatGPT instance, for example, you should probably better only put anonymized data in that, for example, so data that doesn't create any trouble. Let's say it that way. And to protect any data management, and I mean, in the end, AI is a lot about data management. To protect any data that you're managing with some strong protection mechanisms, so passwords, access rights, encryption, etc., so that you really can be sure you are not, let's say, getting into any trouble there. And if you're working with your clients on this, I would really strongly recommend to not make your life too simple. So it's very tempting to just say, okay, let's create some sort of small ChatGPT or whatever solution for a specific business problem. But I would very strongly recommend to also, for those solutions, go into at least a small assessment from a cybersecurity perspective, because otherwise you might have an actual issue. You might even run into regulatory problems, because there are regulations active and coming that apply to AI the same way as they apply to let's say, other software solutions and technologies. So it's on the one hand an actual risk and danger for businesses, and on the other hand a regulatory risk. And I would really strongly recommend, whenever you're working with your clients on setting up some AI solution, to also review that aspect and go into that, and not just make your life too easy, even if it's tempting. And then you always get into that challenge that cybersecurity has always. Sometimes it's perceived as, let's say, slowing business down and making things complicated, etc. So you have to find a good, let's say, balance of not making it too slow. But on the other hand, you also have to make clear that this is an essential control that you must have.
Fantastic. Markus, for listeners who would like to follow up with you, where would you point them online?
I would point them, on the one hand, to my own website, which I can, of course, share the link with you. And I'm also acting as associate partner for 10-4 Consulting. That's I would say, a medium-sized consultancy in Germany. I can also share the link there. And I'm responsible for a large part of their cybersecurity activities, and some other activities around digital transformation and digital process transformation. So I'm very happy for people to get in contact to me, also for other independent consultants, to maybe have a chat on this topic and just exchange on this. So that would be the two access points.
All right. Well, we will include those links in the show notes. Markus, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Will. It was a pleasure.